The 2023 NFL draft class is nearly 2 full seasons into their NFL careers, and some players are off to very promising starts. Guys like CJ Stroud, Will Anderson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and even Puka Nacua all made the Pro Bowl during their rookie season and have been tremendous picks for the franchises that selected them, but others haven't, and in today's video, we're going to discuss 4 of the worst picks from the 2023 NFL draft. A couple of these picks were not good from the start for various reasons, and they were always going to be fighting an uphill battle, while others simply haven't worked out despite having several opportunities. If this video was made a couple of weeks ago, there's a chance Bryce Young would have been in this video. As we know, Bryce had one of the worst starts to his second season imaginable and was benched after the Chargers game back in week 2, but has rebounded nicely since then and looks like the player we saw all throughout the pre-draft process, and I truly couldn't be happier for him. But not every player has bounced back like Bryce Young, and not every player will, and there is a lot to break down in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with Chargers wide receiver Quentin Johnston. Johnston was the 22nd overall pick in the 2023 draft, and when this pick was made, it was viewed as a very good selection, and I thought the Chargers were making a great decision to give Justin Herbert a good wide receiver to work with, and given that both players at the time were 25 or younger, it was natural to get excited about this duo. And things obviously changed quickly in the NFL, but to give you an idea of just how quickly they can change, I was very excited for Quentin to get to learn from both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in his rookie year. Unfortunately, Mike Williams tore his ACL early in the 2023 season, and Keenan missed a few games too, but the idea of these three with Justin Herbert was fun to think about and project once upon a time. Now, what particularly stinks for the Chargers and ultimately QJ with this pick is who is selected around him. Quentin was the second receiver taken in the 2023 draft, and he was the second of 4 consecutive receivers taken in the 2023 draft. The first, of course, was Seahawks receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is really coming into his own in year 2 and is quietly working on 4 straight 70-yard games. JSN is currently on pace for a 99-catch, 1,174-yard season and is actually 9th in the NFL in receiving yards. Zay Flowers was the immediate pick after Quentin Johnston, and Zay is having a career year as he is also top 10 in the NFL in receiving yards as he is 6th. Zay had a really good rookie year and even had a 115-yard game in the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs last year. But as of now, Zay is on pace for a 78 reception, 1,129-yard year along with 5 receiving touchdowns. And I think you can certainly make the argument that despite how productive Zay has been in 2024, he is in an offense that will limit what he can do statistically. I definitely think Zay is one of the more talented receivers in the league, and I do think he could be not just a perennial 1,000-yard player, but a consistent 1,100 or even 1,200-yard player year in and year out. And you can't help but think how good of a connection Justin Herbert and Zay Flowers would have been. The other receiver taken was Vikings receiver Jordan Addison. Addison is in a very unique situation because he is in the same offense as Justin Jefferson, and whether you like, love, or hate Jordan Addison, it's fair to acknowledge he probably won't ever be a 1,400 or 1,500-yard player because of a former Offensive Player of the Year award winner in the same offense. But Addison is currently on pace for a 978-yard, 7-touchdown second season, and he is a really good player, and at times is an underutilized part of the Vikings offense. There's certainly parts of the year where Jordan isn't getting the targets he deserves, as from weeks 4 through 8, he had just 11 catches in 4 games, but over the last 3 games, he has received more targets and is currently working on 3 straight 50-plus yard games. Johnston, on the other hand, has 1 career 100-yard game, and unfortunately for QJ, he is probably best known for a drop against the Packers in 2023, which was late in the 4th quarter, or the drop most recently against the Baltimore Ravens. With Justin Herbert missing some of Quentin's rookie year, and with him only being 22 years old, I was willing to dismiss his rookie year, but his catch percentage has actually decreased from 56.7% in his rookie year to just 52.2% in his second year. There's certainly been a couple of flashes in his second season, but certainly not what the Chargers were hoping when they made the selection a little less than 2 years ago. Next up is Mazi Smith of the Dallas Cowboys, and the way this pick was handled from the start was incredibly frustrating to me for a couple of reasons. Mazi was a really good prospect coming out of Michigan. He was over 330 pounds, and what has to be remembered with defensive tackles is they are not all the same. Aaron Donald and Dexter Lawrence are severely different players, and while they are both dominant, what they do to win and what they do to dominate at the position are two completely different things. And the thing with Mazi Smith was he was a big defensive tackle prospect. Now, he wasn't as good as Dexter Lawrence coming out of Clemson was, but the point was is if you can stuff a 330-pound, two-gapping defensive tackle in the middle of your defense, that is going to force offenses to run the football elsewhere. And if you can force offenses to run the football elsewhere, or to, at minimum, have two offensive linemen go against Mazi on every single play because he is that much of a force, that is advantageous for your defense because it sets everybody else up for success. It creates a free lane for somebody somewhere. But the way the Cowboys handled this was very frustrating, and I found an article while researching for this video written in May of 2024 about how new defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer was going to use Mazi this year. And my frustration with the Mazi Smith selection is summarized by what Mike Zimmer said, and what Mike Zimmer said was there was a point where Mazi's weight dipped below 300 pounds in 2023, and I have no problem with players losing a couple pounds here or there, or even gaining a couple pounds here or there to be fit at the right weight for their matchup that specific week. But Mazi Smith dipping below 300 pounds when he was north of 330 in the draft process is a completely different thing entirely. You are asking this player to completely transform their body and to be a completely different player from who they were just a couple of months ago when you selected them in the first round. And I think all around that was a very poor process from the Cowboys from the start. And the plan, which according to this article, was for Mazi Smith to be a pass rushing defensive tackle and for him to get upfield, which that's fine if you want to draft a defensive tackle to do that to begin with, not take a player who is really good at something else and say, hey, Dexter Lawrence, why don't you drop 40 pounds and go from 340 to 300, and that way you can attack the interior offensive line like an Aaron Donald would, who is a lot lighter than you are, if all of that makes sense. So why I was really frustrated with this pick was the lack of planning, and then obviously once Dan Quinn left, the defense changed a little bit, and Zimmer wanted to get him back up to weight, which is where he was a better player to begin with, and my frustration with this selection was the lack of planning for a first-round pick. Mazi Smith was not a fifth-round developmental tackle that showed a couple of flashes on tape where you said, hey, maybe we can get something out of this player, maybe we'll mess around with a couple of things, and maybe just in the best case scenario, he can pan out and hopefully get 5 or 6 sacks a season, and hopefully give one-on-ones to Micah Parsons on the outside because of how much attention he commands along the interior. It never got to that point, and Mazi Smith has 14 career pressures on over 320 pass rushing snaps, and he only has 6 pressures on 160 pass rushing snaps this year, and for reference, Chiefs defensive back Chamari Connor actually has more pressures on the year than Mazi Smith. So when you factor in all of the pre-draft planning, or in this case, lack of, which ultimately set your first round pick up for failure because you wanted to make him a completely different player than what he was, I think this is without a doubt one of the worst first round picks. Yes, you can very much make the case that Mazi Smith hasn't panned out, and he hasn't been a good player for the Cowboys at all, but he also wasn't set up for success. I mean, imagine the Vikings saying to Justin Jefferson and say, hey Justin, we need you to gain 25 pounds over the course of the next offseason because we want to use you in a completely different role. And that's not all that different from what the Cowboys did to Mazi Smith. It was all around dysfunctional, and there's a reason the Cowboys have slowly fallen off over the past couple of years, and we've really seen that in 2024, and it's due to all around poor planning from the organization, and it started from the top down. And I think because of the poor planning, the lack of commitment to Mazi Smith, and trying to set him up for success again as a first round pick led to a disastrous 2023 draft for the Cowboys, and ultimately one of the worst picks in the 2023 NFL Draft. Emanuel Forbes is up, and this was a pick I didn't like from the start for a couple of reasons. I, and a lot of other people did too for that matter, thought the two best corners in the 2023 draft were Devin Witherspoon from Illinois and Christian Gonzalez from Oregon. I was surprised Gonzalez fell as far as he did in the 2023 draft, and he was available when Washington was on the clock. I thought it made a tremendous amount of sense for Washington to draft Christian Gonzalez as he was a really good prospect, and heading into 2023, the Commanders knew they were going to have to defend CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, and Devontae Smith for the next several years, as AJ was the oldest of the three at the time and was only 26 years old. Obviously, none of those guys were going anywhere, and drafting a corner made a lot of sense. Washington's defensive line heading into 2023 was also really good, as they had 4 first-round picks invested in the trenches in Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Montez Sweat, and Chase Young. Emanuel was also a ball-hawking corner, as he had 14 interceptions during his time at Mississippi State, and actually set the record for most collegiate pick sixes during his time as a Bulldog. But less than 2 years later, both Montez Sweat and Chase Young are no longer on the roster, and both players were actually traded during Forbes' rookie season, and most recently, Forbes himself was flat out released. I didn't like the Forbes selection when it was made, but the writing was on the wall for Emanuel whenever the previous regime was let go at the end of last year. Former general manager Martin Mayhew made the selection, and the 2023 Commanders season was pretty bad, and this team went from 4-5 through 9 games to 4-13 through 17 games, and lost their final 2 games of the 2023 season in convincing fashion to the 49ers and Cowboys by a combined score of 65-20. Whenever a new regime enters the picture, and for those who may not be familiar with what I mean by this, I mean a new general manager and head coach, and subsequently a new entire staff, unless you are a clear above average starter at your position, your job is not safe, really regardless of who you are, because the current general manager did not draft you. Now, quarterbacks are a bit different, and that's an entirely separate discussion, but the point is, after the disappointing year Emanuel had in his rookie year, he was already on thin ice entering 2024. He got hurt in week 1 of the 2024 season, and when he came back, he still was not a good player for Washington, and rather than continue to have him on the roster for a player who was a clear draft bust, they let him go. And what I think is particularly impressive about the Commanders' success in 2024 is none of their first-round picks from any of the past several years are on the roster. Jamin Davis, their 2021 first-round pick, was released in October of 2024. Jahan Dotson, their 2022 first-round pick, was traded to the division rival Eagles prior to the start of the 2024 season, and Emanuel Forbes is now off the team too. And I think due in large part to all of this perpetual failure around the Commanders organization, that makes the year Jayden Daniels is having even more special. But the Emanuel Forbes pick was bad at the time, and it's even worse less than 2 years later. And I would compare this pick at the corner position similar to the Justin Jefferson and Jalen Reagor pick back to back. Obviously Gonzalez is not at the level Justin Jefferson is at the receiver position, but in the sense of where these two were viewed as prospects, I think the comparison is strikingly similar. Myles Murphy of the Cincinnati Bengals is up, and one thing that I do want to clarify is for most of the picks in today's video, with the exception of the Emanuel Forbes pick, I liked when these picks were made. I love the idea of Quentin Johnston pairing up with Justin Herbert and being a player that Justin could lean on for the next several years, and I really like the idea of Mazi Smith right in the middle of the Cowboys defense and being a tone setter in the run game and hopefully the pass rushing game moving forward, as long as he could tweak a couple of things from his time at Michigan. And I also love the idea of Myles Murphy going to the Bengals for a couple of reasons. The Bengals are notorious for not paying players, or at least not giving them long contracts, really longer than a year of guarantees, which is a reason that a lot of Bengals players leave in free agency. Yes, I know they pay Joe Burrow, and they're going to pay Jamar Chase soon, but those guys are obviously outliers rather than the standard of what goes on in Cincinnati when it's time to pay players. The main reason that I love the Myles Murphy selection as much as I did was I thought that they would let Sam Hubbard go, and that there would eventually be a pass rushing duo of Trey Hendrickson and Myles Murphy. And also within the selection of Myles Murphy, the Bengals were coming off of back-to-back AFC Championship game appearances, and of course the Super Bowl appearance back in 2021, so I thought when this pick was made that by the time the 2023 playoffs roll around, Myles will have a full season underneath his belt, and that he will be a legitimate contributor by the time January rolled around, and that they would have 3 solid edge rushers getting after the quarterback, and of course the aforementioned Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, and then of course a rookie Myles Murphy to go along with that. Now, unfortunately, things didn't go as planned, and Joe Burrow suffered a season-ending injury, and the Bengals didn't make the playoffs. But within Myles' rookie year, he had a couple of sacks, and he was a rotational player, which was about what I expected as a 21-year-old rookie. We've had the conversation on the channel several times about 21-year-old pass rushers, and really even offensive tackles for that matter too, making the transition from college to the NFL, and it's a big one because 21-year-olds going up against 29 and 30-year-olds is a lot different than going up against fellow collegiate players. You're going up against legit grown men in the NFL rather than other 21 or 22-year-olds. So I wasn't surprised to see Myles struggle a little bit during his rookie season. But what is really concerning for Myles Murphy and the Bengals now is that Myles is still struggling in 2024, and he's struggling to get on the field consistently. And this defense, as everyone knows, is awful. The 2024 Bengals defense has allowed 34 or more points in 6 games this year, which is by far the most in the league. And if Myles isn't getting on the field now in what is a terrible defense, then I simply ask the question, when is he ever going to get on the field consistently? And I think that is the recipe for another draft disappointment for the Bengals, and that outside of a couple of players, that there's a reason they're struggling in 2024, and it's because they haven't had the draft success that they had in previous years, and we are starting to see that in a big way. Joe Burrow is having an MVP caliber season as he has 30 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, and is currently on pace for over 4,700 yards and 42 passing touchdowns to just 7 interceptions, yet their 2023 first-round pick, who was an edge rusher, has started a grand total of 0 career games. I know Sam Hubbard was above him coming into the 2023 season, but we're nearly 2 full years into this pick, and Myles Murphy hasn't really showed anything as a pass rusher, and I think this is at minimum a draft disappointment, and I think in a year we can certainly have the draft bust conversation. Now, we went with mostly first-round picks in today's video, and I also was going to include Giants corner Deonte Banks, who was taken after Jordan Addison of the Vikings, and we all knew the Giants needed a receiver entering the 2023 draft, but I didn't include them, and we just did a video on the Giants last week if you were interested in hearing a full breakdown of the New York Giants. But that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 42% of people watching are subscribed, and helps the channel tremendously. We're closing in on 175K, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.